chapter 18, beginning with verse 13. Now, what happened? Oh, thank you. I need a monitor to do that for me. 2 Kings 18:13. Now, what has just happened in chapter 17? Assyria invaded Israel, the northern kingdom, captured Samaria, and demolished the nation, and exported them or exiled them to Samaria is here, and exiled them over to Assyria. Some here and some over there in Media, to the Medes. And so the northern kingdom came to an end after 254 years of sinful leadership started by Jeroboam. In chapter 18, we have some good news for a change, as Hezekiah is made king over the remaining southern kingdom. His father, his name was what? Hezekiah's father's name was Ahaz. What kind of a fellow was he? Terrible. He was terrible. And that's for a Judean king too. It's bad enough that Israel was led by so many bad kings, but Judah had no excuse, especially after they saw the fate that Samaria, the northern kingdom, suffered. So he is king over Judah, begins a war on all of his father's idolatrous practices, and even destroys, oddly enough, Moses' bronze serpent that they had turned into a what? An article allowed to be worshipped, or well, the name just slipped past me. Anyway, they made it an object of worship. So after all of these years, 700 or 800 years, Hezekiah has to destroy Moses' bronze brass serpent because of what the people didn't make use out of it. And that brings us up to about, I missed the fact that Hezekiah decided to rebel against the Assyrian authority that he was under. And in verse 13, we've moved from Sargon as king of Assyria to his son named Sennacherib. And in verse 13, he comes up against Judah and takes all of the fortified cities. I think it was about 46 of them. And when this happened, Hezekiah sends an envoy to the Assyrian king Sennacherib, offering to surrender and to pay whatever ransom would be required to induce Assyria to leave me alone. So Hezekiah got the response from the Assyrian king of how much money he wanted, so he empties the treasury, not only of the royal treasury, but the treasury of the temple also, and he even strips the gold that he had inlaid over the doors of the temple to give to the king of Assyria. The king of Assyria accepts a bribe that Hezekiah gave him to leave him alone. Now remember, back in 2 Kings 16:8, about maybe say 20 years ago, Hezekiah's father Ahaz had, in verse chapter 16:8, it says, Ahaz took the silver and gold that was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasuries of the king's house, and sent a present to the king of Assyria. So his father had already emptied everything that they had, or at least that he thought the king of Assyria would be satisfied with. And now Hezekiah, his son, is forced to do the same thing. In spite of this, the Assyrian king in verse 17 and 18 sends an envoy and several regiments of troops to Jerusalem to try to intimidate Hezekiah and demand his surrender. Now, would he rather just have Hezekiah surrender or to lay a long, expensive siege? Well, certainly he would rather. It would be a lot less loss of life and a lot less time involved. And so he's hoping that he could threaten and bulldoze Hezekiah into surrender, because apparently the ransom that Hezekiah sent to him wasn't enough alone to satisfy the king of Assyria. Yeah.
Mine has, that was 11 tons of silver and 1 ton of gold.
A ton of gold and 11 tons of silver.
And that wasn't enough.
And that wasn't enough, because he still came up against Hezekiah and specifically Jerusalem. So he in verse 17 and verse 20 and 21, he sends an Assyrian field commander and a couple of other high-ranking officials and asks Hezekiah a question. What or who are you going to rely on in this pickle you find yourself in? Verse 21, do you really believe that Egypt can and will help you? And the commander was correct. Remember, Isaiah had called Egypt a bruised reed, which if you lean upon will pierce your hand, and instead of helping you, they will harm you. So Egypt was not going to be any help. And in verse 22, he tells Hezekiah's representative, so you really believe that your God, Yahweh, will help you? After all, didn't you just destroy all of his high places, worship sites, and now you expect him to come to your rescue? That shows that Sennacherib didn't exactly understand the religious system, the religious situation that was in Judah. Do you really believe that this Yahweh will help you? He can't be happy that you have done that. So don't rely on him for any help either. In verse 23 through 25, the field commander demanded that Hezekiah surrender. Because if I was to give you 2,000 horses, you don't have enough men to put riders on them. And he was probably correct. And because if the entire army of Judah could not stand against one regiment of one of my officers, which was probably true, he demanded Hezekiah's surrender because Judah could not depend upon Egypt for help, and because the Lord himself in verse 25 had sent me anyway. Whether that was true, we do not know. He could have been just using that as a tactic to induce Hezekiah to surrender, or the Lord may have done exactly that. We don't know.
The Lord had done that.
And yes, he had. As a matter of fact, he had. Remember, I'm going to raise up these people to destroy my sinful people, and this is one of them. So technically, he was correct. Whether he spoke to him directly, I don't know. Now, in verse 26 and 27, Judah's officials say, please stop speaking in Hebrew, the common language, because the people on the wall of Jerusalem can hear everything you say, and we would prefer that they not listen to your threats and your persuasive arguments. I want you to speak in Aramaic or Syriac, which was the official international language of commerce at the time, much like English is worldwide today. Everybody speaks English. Did the commander listen to the request? Please don't speak Hebrew because these men on the wall can hear and understand everything you're saying. That probably just egged him on. It was his intention all along. If he could foment enough discontent among the followers, maybe he could take the city without a fight. And he told in verse 29 and 30 that neither Hezekiah nor your God Yahweh is going to be able to deliver you. And he challenged them in verse 31 to surrender and make a peace treaty. By the way, you will have all that you need to eat and drink. By the way, I skipped verse 27, and we won't go into it. But the commander stated in graphic terms that his message was for everybody, the soldiers on the wall and all the people that can hear. And they are going to be the people that suffer the most if we go into a prolonged siege here. We won't go into the rest of the verse at all. Anyway, he said, by the way, if you'll surrender to me instead of having that happen to you, you'll be able to eat and drink all you want, and then when we get ready to move you, we'll move you to a land that's just as good as the land in which you're living. In other words, things are going to be fine. He challenged them in verse 32, you need to choose life, not death. Reminded them in verse 33 and 34 that, by the way, on our trip over here, from here, over here, and down here, which is the way they would have gone, there wasn't a single nation that was able to stand against us. We defeated them all on the trip. And what makes you think that you, Judah, with 46 of your cities already taken, and all that's about all that's left is the city of Jerusalem itself, what makes you think that you're going to be able to withstand my great army?
More than that.
Yeah.
The gods.
Huh?
The people, the gods, all the gods of the nations.
Yeah.
Where were all those gods that we took them to?
Right.
And we've even taken Samaria, which worship the same God.
Same God that you do.
In his opinion, anyway.
Yes, exactly right. And so in verse 37, Hezekiah's officials took this, oh boy, persuasive on the part of the Assyrians report to King Hezekiah so that he would know what was said out there and try to figure out a course of action that might save the city of Jerusalem from the fate that Samaria and the northern kingdom of Israel had already suffered. Chapter 19, verse 1. Yes. Yes. Oh, from the secular worldly point, they had zero hope. That's right.
It was impossible.
The city was already surrounded.
It was all but destroyed.
Yes.
We're going to destroy it unless you give up. And some would give it up, meaning toss the king out. Part of it. Toss the king over the wall. Yeah. That's implied.
Yes. Yes. If you were a king back then and on the losing end, it was a bad deal. All right, we're going to continue with the reign of Hezekiah in chapter 19. And when Hezekiah got the report, he was, needless to say, extremely distraught and upset at what they had reported to him. And so he does the right thing. He sends a delegation to the prophet Isaiah, who was living there at the time, for advice and help. What do we do here? And he sent this message in verse 3. This is a black day of trouble, rebuke, and disgrace for Judah. The children have come to birth, and there is no strength to deliver. And what happens to the mother in a situation like that? She probably will die. We have gotten to the point where we can't do anything else. As David said, we are utterly helpless. We can't bring the child forth. We're in childbirth, but we can't do anything about it. So we are in great, dire danger. And Hezekiah told Isaiah that perhaps the Lord had listened in on the conversation just outside the walls of Jerusalem and had heard and heeded the insults that the Assyrian commander had given. Remember, Yahweh won't help you. He can't help you. And to pray for those of us who are left in the last part of verse 4. Now, Sennacherib, he's the Assyrian commander, in his report on this very campaign, took 46 cities. That's where we get the number. I don't think it's in our Bible. He took 46 Judean cities, and he says, I killed vast numbers of Judean soldiers, and as he himself tells us, I took 200,150 captives already to Assyria. And John and I were talking last week about, and this is Isaiah 8, and I want to read this because this is Isaiah's words on this particular situation. Isaiah 8, verses, 7 and 8. Now therefore, behold, the Lord is about to bring upon them, the Assyrians, the strong and abundant water of the Euphrates, even the king, no, upon his own people, I'm sorry, even the king of Assyria and all his glory, and it will rise up over all of its channels and go all over its banks. Then it will sweep into Judah. It will overflow and pass through. It will reach even to the neck. That's the city of Jerusalem. It's like he's got the whole country strangled, and the only part left is the head, and it's even to the neck, and the spread of its wings will fill the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel. And that's right after, by the way, the prophecy that Isaiah had given Ahaz, that a child, virgin will give birth to a child, and his name shall be called Emmanuel. And so Judah is in dire straits. She is being choked right up to the, Jerusalem, rather, right up to the neck. And in verse 6, Isaiah tells them, don't be scared of this guy or his army. The Lord will cause Sennacherib to go home, and once there, he will face a violent death. So don't worry about it. Verses 8 and 9, Isaiah's prophecy that he had just uttered now begins to take shape. The Assyrian commander withdraws to help his king fight down the road in a place called Libnah, which is over close to the Philistine border. The Syrian king, it seems, had received a report that Egypt was rapidly marching north to fight against him. And so he sends Hezekiah another message, really now hoping for sure that he can induce Hezekiah and Judah to surrender with Egypt breathing down his neck from the south. He says in verse 10, don't trust God Yahweh, because that's futile. Look at what we have done to all the countries that we have attacked. Will Judah be any different? Their gods didn't save them, and your God will not save you either. I suggest in verse 13 that you go back and see if you can find all of their kings. And they are no longer on the throne. They're probably dead or exiled. Verses 14 through 19. Hezekiah spreads the great advice, spreads the letter before the Lord, as if to get him to please read it and understand it. He says in verse 15, you alone of all the kingdoms are all over all of the kingdoms of the earth. Now Sennacherib thought that Yahweh was God over what? Judah. And that's it. That once you get out of the borders of the country, another local god takes over.
Jehovah was yet another God.
Local god, yes. He was just another one. And we've already taken care of him in the northern part of this kingdom, and now we're going to do what we said we were going to do in the southern part. In verse 16, Hezekiah explains the problem. Look at how Sennacherib has insulted you. I'm very aware of what Assyria has already done. I also know that the false gods of those nations that they conquered are nothing, and that you are the true and only living God. And please, please come and save us. Now, if you've ever heard of the term remnant, this is truly it. The northern kingdom, 10 of the 12 tribes, have already been carried off into captivity. And now the southern kingdom of Judah is reduced to one city, the capital city, surrounded by the Assyrian army. So they are truly the remnant, all that's left. So God promises a rescue through his prophet Isaiah, beginning with verse 20. Sennacherib is going to flee from Jerusalem, and the virgin daughter of Zion, or the people of the city of Jerusalem, will laugh and mock at him as he leaves. The reason for the judgment, verse 22, 24, he has mocked God. Verses 25 through 27, God directs this reply directly to the Assyrian king himself. He says, by the way, sir, I am the one who long ago ordained you to be who you are. It was my doing, not yours. By the way, the people you conquered in verse 26 on your way down here, I weakened them to make your conquest possible. Verse 27, by the way, I know everything you're doing and everything you're thinking and every place you're going. That was his message to the Assyrian king. He says in verse 28, he would be defeated and led by hooking his nose back home where he would die. Verses 29 through 31 is a predictive way of saying that Judah will not only survive, but will survive 2 years long enough for them to be able to sow and reap in the third year. That is, they will not be locked into the city, but will be free enough from the Assyrian or any other threat to go out and sow and reap again. And Judah in verse 30 and 31 would indeed survive. There would be a remnant, rather, that would survive. Verse 32 through 34, God reassures Hezekiah that the Assyrian king will not conquer Judah. He says in verse 32, in a way that he will not even be able to lay a full-fledged siege against it, because I won't let him close enough to shoot an arrow into your city. Judah will be left with a remnant. He will go home in verse 33 instead of laying a siege against you. And God closed his message in verse 34 with a final message word to the Assyrian king. He says, I will defend this city for my honor and for the sake of the family or the descendants of David, a man after my own heart. John.
You can certainly see why the Jews, so many of them died in 70 AD in the city of Jerusalem, because a similar situation
Very similar.
had come up, and God had saved them always before. It always, well, that's not exactly right, because the city is destroyed not too long from now, but they depended on the city of Jerusalem to be able to stand, and God to take care of the Romans, and unfortunately for them, it had been decreed already by God. He was washing his hands.
Yeah, over their rejection of Christ. Yes, 40 years of rejection, and that was all that it took for God to say, I've had enough of this. God allowed the Roman army to lay a siege around. Boy, and a lot of Jews died. I think it was in the hundreds of thousands, if I remember history correctly. Verse 35 through 37, the angel of the Lord went out into the Assyrian camp and took care of 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. The next morning, when the Assyrian soldiers that were left got up and saw what had happened, they decided, I think I'll break camp and go home. And that's the best way I know how to put it. And that was the decision that was made. If you take 185,000 army loss, then you probably will have to pack up and go home.
That'll take some wind out of the sails.
That sure did. That sure did. So they all went back home to Assyria, probably Nineveh, the capital. And by the way, the Assyrian king Sennacherib, who was the fellow that was responsible for all of this, was assassinated by his own 2 sons while worshiping his pagan god 20 years later, in the year probably 681 BC. And let's see, we've only got 4 minutes. Let me close with this quote, because he says, I'm going to take care of Sennacherib. Okay, he's going to die. And it didn't happen until 20 years passed by. And this quote not only applies to this situation, but to many situations, because of how impatient I am and some of you may be impatient too. But here's the quote: "The mills of God grind slowly, but exceedingly fine." And that gave me a lot of hope. It's going to be done, and it's going to be done in God's time, and it's going to be done right, just as He said. Any questions or comments? At all?
Say that quote one more time.
"The mills of God grind slowly, but exceedingly fine." I like that. I like that. Anyway, the last part of that was, he was Sennacherib, after two of his sons murdered him. Now, whether this S.R. Hardin, who took his throne and was one of those who was guilty of the murder, I forgot to look up. I don't know. But his S.R. E.S.A.R.H.A.D.D.O.N. was the one who succeeded him. Well, let us pray as we dismiss. Our Heavenly Father, give us patience as we deal with each other, patience as we deal with our own faults and shortcomings, patience as we face the difficulties and the stresses and the problems that life always presents to all of us. Help us to trust You instead of trusting ourselves. In Jesus' blessed name, amen.